We're back live with Jennifer Hecker with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida.
Good morning.
We are interested in talking to you about Florida water supply. First of all, I don't know that many people know the danger that we're in here in Southwest Florida. Could you kind of go into that because when I went by this Conservancy and saw the damage that the water tables had happened to the water tables here, it surprised me. Would you mind going over that a little bit?
Sure. Over 90% of the residents in Southwest Florida rely on groundwater for their water supply, and that groundwater is being depleted. The superficial aquifer, which is the most commonly used water source in the area, is being used at a rate that is faster than what is being replenished through rainfall. Mm-hmm. So you, just like a bank account, you can't continue to draw out more than you're putting in. Eventually, you're going to have an overdraft situation. That's what we're dealing with here in Florida, where we know already that we need to move to alternative water supply sources, exercise more water conservation, and try to do more to capture the plentiful rainfall that we do get here to increase our water supply going forward.
The key there is that people need just to be aware of the fact that there is a problem. The Conservancy and others have really been at the forefront of trying to create help. And you've done real well with that so far. There's quite a few measures in place that are going to try to help us with the water supply. Could you kind of go into a couple of those measures?
Sure. I think that, it is very challenging in an area like Florida where we're literally surrounded by water to realize that what we're dealing with is a finite amount of fresh water available for human consumption. That's the limited resource that we're dealing with. A lot of our water is salt water, and that's very expensive to treat, to filter, and to be able to use for public supply needs. Generally, it can be upwards of 10 times more expensive to use that desalinated water. We only partially desal right now, but if we had to go to full desalination, we could be looking at bottled water prices for flushing our toilets, and so that would really change our whole lifestyle, and we want to avoid that. We think we can avoid that just through better ability to capture the rainfall, store it. Our wetlands naturally used to historically do this for us, store that rainfall and cleanse it. Well, we've lost a lot of those natural wetlands, so we have to now artificially replace that storage and that treatment if we're to maintain and increase our water supply here in South Florida. And that's really what Everglades Restoration is about, and a number of other water infrastructure projects that are more regional in our local community that we are trying to get funding and political support to implement.
You just answered a question I have. Someone's moving here from the Midwest and there's no water around. They come to Florida and, my gosh, you drive 5 miles and there's the ocean, but I didn't realize it was a saltwater aspect of it.
Right. So desalination is often thought of as the solution to our freshwater problems, but the reason you don't see it more widely used is it's extremely expensive. There's a lot of energy involved, and of course energy prices are continuing to rise. There's a byproduct, the brine, that has to be disposed of. That can be very problematic. So there's a lot of things that people don't think about that are involved in that process that drive up the cost and make it, frankly, the most expensive option. And we're trying to look at more cost-effective ways of meeting our water supply needs. And that can be done, honestly, we are using about twice the national average per person here in this area for our water supply needs. So we can do more to conserve water. A lot of it, about half of it goes to irrigation. And also a big water user that we don't think about is agriculture, which still is the largest water user in our region.
So that's
beyond
why we're using twice the amount.
Residential use. Yeah. So between agriculture and residential irrigation use, we are using enormous amounts of water, and there's things we can be doing to be a little bit more water efficient in how we irrigate, both on the agricultural side and on the residential side, by using, better crop or plant selections that are more appropriate for our climate and our soils. There's also a lot we can do just to capture that fresh water that we're receiving through rainfall, and we are looking to large-scale projects to do that, which is part of the whole Everglades restoration effort, is to be able to build large-scale reservoirs and filter marshes to try to capture that rainfall so that we can replenish the aquifers and push back the sea from sea level rise with fresh water.
You know, and I'd like to say too that if you're listening out there, and this is believe me, this is a very quick conversation that we're having. It's going to be a matter of minutes. But if you go to the Conservancy off of Goodlet Frank Road, and you go back in there and go to the building that has the tour, they will show you the problem. I was never aware of it until my wife told me to come with her, and so I went with her to the Conservancy and had it explained in great detail. With those of us in our generation that are living here under the sun and the beautiful sun, beautiful conditions, we don't realize that in 20 years, these conditions, if we're not careful now, if we don't take steps now, these conditions won't be here in 20 years. It's going to be a whole lot different. So take the steps now. The Conservancy is at the forefront of it. Matter of fact, you have some legislative issues going on right now, too, don't you?
Yes, one of the biggest threats that we've been facing most recently to our water supplies here in Collier County is the introduction of fracking in our community. So we've had oil drilling for decades, but we haven't had fracking. Fracking uses enormous amounts of water. The Hogan well, which was the first case of fracking in our area, was permitted for 280 million gallons of fresh water from our sufficient potable aquifer water supply source per year. And, you know, that's one well. So if you start to multiply many wells using that technique, you can see we're going to have a serious water supply problem. And we're trying to deal with that, as well as the chemicals that are involved in that process are highly hazardous to human health. They're being injected underground through different layers, and you know, if there isn't proper well casings or confinement of those fluids, they can potentially migrate into other areas where they could pose a threat to human health. So we are working very hard to introduce legislation this session to try to regulate these new techniques, because frankly in Florida they're legally allowed right now, and there's virtually no regulation around them to make sure that they're done responsibly.
Well, I give you credit. You've got quite a job to tackle, so it needs to be done. Yes, thank you.
You know, but
I appreciate that, but we really rely on the citizens of this community as well. I mean, we are really only as powerful and as effective as the people that we represent here, the citizens. And so, you know, we'll be posting alerts on our website, really encourage people to learn more and try to get involved to help support the combined collective effort to protect our water supply sources for all of us.
We'll also have that on our website, over55andlive.com. One of the things that I wanted to ask you to explain is some people, when you hear the word fracking, they don't know what that exactly means.
And make sure you pronounce it correctly. Remember, you're on the radio. Yes.
Absolutely.
Would you mind explaining what fracking is?
Sure. So it is a short term for what's called hydraulic fracturing. And typically, hydraulic fracturing is done in shale geology. We down here in Florida have limestone geology, which is very different. That's part of our concern with using these techniques that have been used elsewhere in the country. Here in Florida is that we have a very unique geologic and hydrologic condition and situation here. And our softer porous rock is, frankly, in our view, more risky to be employing these techniques than where it is typically done elsewhere. The process is generally to pump large amounts of fluids, including these highly hazardous chemicals, including benzene and cancer-causing chemicals, underground, and trying to create artificial fractures or pockets of rock, that openings, to then extract the oil more forcibly than conventional drilling. And that's usually followed up by a proppant or a sand to keep those openings propped open so that they don't collapse underground. And then that fluid is pumped in and out to try to gather the oil and bring it back up to the surface with this flowback fluid, and then it's separated out and then pumped back and forth underground over and over again until that process is complete. So this is our concern, is if those fluids, because of the porous nature of our rock, escape the area that they're targeted for, and there are these old abandoned wells that go down very deep that aren't properly plugged to current standards, that are out throughout Southwest Florida. A lot of people aren't aware that there's these old straws in the ground, essentially, that could allow for the potential upward migration of fluids into drinking water aquifers. So we're trying to make sure that before we proceed with the large-scale use of these techniques, that we create the proper legal and regulatory framework to ensure that they don't create unacceptable risks to our water supply sources.
Absolutely. Jennifer, what is the situation with the Collier-Hogan well? If somebody hadn't heard about it, would you mind kind of explaining a little bit about that?
Sure. So this well was up near the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary here in Collier County, and it had been a production well. The oil company wasn't satisfied with the amount of production that was happening, so they wanted to stimulate the well, is what they call it, but use hydraulic fracturing or fracking to try to increase production. And that's, the pumping of those chemicals underground at high pressure to try to create artificial voids to pull the oil more forcibly out of the ground. They did that without authorization. The state tried to stop them. Eventually, the state levied a small enforcement fine against them of $25,000. The Conservancy and the county, when they became aware of this months later, were very concerned that that was not effectively protecting the public or setting the right bar going forward. So we ended up having to engage in some legal action to compel the state to create more meaningful enforcement and groundwater monitoring to investigate the matter and make sure that our water supplies weren't contaminated. They're still doing that. They just installed a deep groundwater monitoring well and are starting to collect data to look for any of those chemicals that we're concerned about. So, there is a concern that we have that we haven't gotten the systemic issues fixed here, that the driller is currently fighting the DEP to regain access to its permits, and those permits could potentially be transferred to another oil operator to resume production at that well. And frankly, that the laws and regulations would allow for many other wells to go the same route, and we don't have the tools right now legally to stop other drillers from going this direction without, letting the state have the authority to deny anything it feels is unsafe, because right now the state lacks that authority, and that's something we need to fix immediately, and that's what we're trying to get our legislators to move forward and address this legislative session.
Let's talk about this for a second, because while you were talking, all of a sudden it occurred to me, when we were talking about the amount of water that they were using, the 662,000 gallons, it occurred to me that they're not bringing this water in from Utah. The water that they're using is the rainwater, the water that we use to bathe with, the water we drink every day, the water we use to cook. So the more water that they use, the more contaminated our water is. Am I seeing that correctly?
Well, actually, they do. What they do is that water's lost, because what they're pulling it out of the superficial aquifer and using it for an industrial use, which we disagree with the appropriateness of that.
Yeah.
Because that water really is our potable water supply, and it should be maintained for that use. They should be using the alternative water supply sources for industrial use, frankly.
Exactly.
But once they do mix it with these hazardous chemicals, it can never be reused again. So they have to deep well inject it far underground, and we hope that it gets to its target place and is locked up deep underground. But the bottom line is it's lost from the water cycle. When you use water for agriculture, you're pulling that water out of the ground, you're irrigating crops, so of course you need clean water, and then that water seeps back and recharges the aquifer. Well, this water is being pulled out of the ground, mixed with hazardous chemicals, used for this basically one-time industrial use, and then deep well injected far underground where it can never be recirculated through the hydrologic cycle back into the aquifers. So if we're lucky, it won't contaminate. It'll be lost, but that still is a problem because we have limited water supply. We can't just keep using it and disposing of it. We need to recirculate and recycle water, and that is what we currently do with our residential and agricultural use. Is that water eventually finds its way back through to the aquifer, but this water cannot ever intermingle if we are lucky and it goes where it's supposed to. It will not intermingle with public water supplies because it has these highly toxic chemicals in it.
Jennifer, I have a question for you. This is a learning experience to me. How do you answer, excuse me, the question when somebody talks about, obviously we need water, but we also need oil. Is this fracking a necessary evil?
Well, I think the one thing that's important to understand is that Florida is not really important in the scheme of oil production in the U.S. It produces less than 0.1% of U.S. oil domestic production. So when we're talking about energy independence, Florida oil is really not going to get us there. So I think the bottom line is we have to evaluate, is the juice worth the squeeze, if you will? Is the benefit from getting this oil out of the ground, and again, who benefits, worth the costs and risks that are associated, and then who would pay and deal with those costs and those risks? So we feel that overall, that to protect the quality of life and the tourism-based lifestyle and economy we have here in Southwest Florida, that frankly we need to be more careful and limit oil production to only those areas that are appropriate, which are the least environmentally sensitive areas. And we need to look at the water use and promote drilling practices that use less water or use alternative water supply sources.
That makes sense.
Jennifer, how can we get involved legislatively? How can the folks out there get involved legislatively with this, besides just becoming aware? Is there places they can write or places they can go to learn more about it or to actually help and volunteer to talk about this?
Absolutely. So on our Conservancy website, we have an oil drilling webpage, but we will also, under our Take Action, any person, you don't have to be a member necessarily to utilize this feature of our website, can go on the Take Action website, and we'll be posting alerts and making it very easy for citizens to weigh in at key decision points to their elected officials on this matter. And we just received a draft bill that the Department of Environmental Protection has released. We're very disappointed. It doesn't cover many of the fundamental key issues that need to be addressed to properly regulate this industry going forward in these techniques in our community. So we're going to be putting together some information about this and posting that bill and letting the public get engaged and trying to push that the state broaden out and deal with some of the other issues necessary to properly regulate this industry.
That's super. One of the things I'd like to cover also, I'd like to add, is that the Conservancy is one of the ones that is at the forefront of this. They also work by contribution. So if you have a chance to go to the Conservancy and just to become a member, just to become an active member with the Conservancy, it helps them in their efforts, their legislative efforts. It helps them all the way around. And besides that, it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place to go. They have tours, they have water tours, they have ecosystems that you can go and tour through. They have a hospital that takes care of all of our, not all of our animals, but a lot of our wildlife here that when it becomes injured, they take it to the Conservancy. So on top of taking care of our water, the Conservancy really, really works towards helping us here in Southwest Florida maintain the lifestyle that we love. And this is just one large part of it. Jennifer, we have a link on our website to the Conservancy. I will make a little more prominent link to the Water Conservancy section of that so that people can go on our website, over55andlive.com, and find that. But could you also give us the website?
Sure. It's www.conservancy.org. And again, I really appreciate you mentioning that. We are completely supported by this community, and we work for this community. So we've been in existence for over 50 years, started with just a group of concerned citizens, still totally supported by citizens in this community. And we try to work on the behalf of those citizens and be their voice and their presence at these key decision points to make sure that our elected leaders are understanding what their desires are with protecting our environment, our quality of life, and our economy here.
Absolutely. One of the things that many people don't know is that the reason we don't look like Southeast Florida is because of the Conservancy. The Conservancy we actually had an opportunity to have Marco Island and Naples join as one, that whole stretch out there. The Conservancy bought the land and still owns the land out there, quite a bit of it, and they also helped make sure that people can't build high-rises on it. So we have our wildlife intact, and it's just a wonderful thing that you did, and I appreciate that so very much.
Well, thank you. We still work very hard to this day. Unfortunately, the battle's never done as far as trying to protect the quality of life that we've been able to cultivate here in Southwest Florida, and so that's what we work for every day, is trying to maintain and protect that quality of life and ensure that we will have it for generations to come.
This is something that's very meaningful to us here in Southwest Florida. Those of you that are listening, get out, get involved. It's time to go out and see this conservancy, see the conservancy, become a member. Give them funds. They need them, but they're working for you. These funds are not just for them, it's for you. It's something you can do to pay yourself and your future generations back. Jennifer, we thank you so very much for being on the air. That's Jennifer with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Would you mind being on again sometime in the near future?
I would love that, and our pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us to
Thank you.
participate.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.